Just need to get the link. It's trying to make things as festive as possible. So that's why I have Christmas lights. Okay. I know a couple other people said they were going to be coming on by, so hopefully that's still the case.
Yeah.
I'll give them about another minute to get going. Oh, whoa. I just saw the news about the massive crash in western Wisconsin. 100+ vehicles involved.
Oh, geez.
And Merry Christmas. Does it feel like, okay, so you're in Ohio? Or where?
I'm in Michigan.
Okay. Did you guys get any snow?
Yeah, we got snow. At least don't think we've gotten any more since I've gotten here, but it's still on the ground.
Because, yeah, we do not have any snow. And it makes me sad because to me, Christmas means snow. And I don't know what to do with that then. All right, y'all. You said you were coming. See where you are. Yeah. We just send them a quick message to remind them, and then we will get to talking. I should have some Christmas music pulled up. What's your favorite Christmas song, Peter?
Like classic Christmas song or?
Yeah, just, anything that you hear a lot.
Have yourself a Merry Little Christmas.
Yeah. That's a good one to sing.
Yeah, that's some good sentimental value, I think. I've spent a lot of Christmases away from home, so.
Yeah. I remember, well, no, there was only one Christmas when I was in Denmark that I was by myself, and that was definitely probably the hardest Christmas I had to deal with. And it was interesting though, and I can talk more about this too, that idea of having different popular culture experiences with Christmas, because there were definitely things over in Denmark that were different from what I'd experienced over here. And I thought that was really interesting. All right, well, I sent them notes. Hopefully they're able to come in. This is kind of just, more of an informal one, just maybe a little bit more fun kind of talk. But yeah, thank you, Peter, for being here and being part of this popular culture dialogue talk. The eve before the Christmas Eve, I suppose. Is it Festivus? Is that what it is today?
Yes, Festivus is today. So I have to get my Festivus notes out to everyone that I've been disappointed in.
So that's something to talk about. But okay, Peter, I don't know if you've been on a dialogue before, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think this is my first time. I'm Peter Cullen Bryan. I teach English at Clemson University. My areas of focus are comic books, particularly the fan studies angle. I have a book out just this year on translation of Donald Duck comics into German and the cultural implications thereof. So I'm excited to be here and talk about Christmas.
Cool. And yes, I'm sorry, everyone. I had at least 3 other people who said that they were interested in coming and talking today, but I don't know where they are. Hopefully they'll be able to come join us soon. But if not, I'm pretty sure Peter and I can talk this up. I'm also wearing my X-Files ugly Christmas sweater, which I'm not a sweater person, so I'm really warm right now. And I'll be taking this off as soon as we're done. But yeah, so Peter, I think you and I are maybe similar in age too, because I'm 43. And I think looking back over my history now with Christmas, it's interesting to see the changes in how pop culture has responded to it. But I kind of just had a first question I wanted us to weigh in on. How responsible is popular culture for our modern understanding of what Christmas is?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's certainly taken a much larger role in the long term. There's that we've sort of lost those religious connotations for a lot of Christmas, and many people still celebrate the religious aspects. But culturally, we've shifted away from that. It's more, I hate to bang the consumer drum, but it's more about presents. It's more about trees and lights and a lot of these signifiers of Christmas. And I think a lot of that comes from popular culture, particularly sort of the 80s and 90s Christmas movies, something like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, I think, has done a lot to sort of put people in the idea that, yeah, it's about family, but doesn't necessarily need to have this traditional religious angle. It can take whatever form you need it to be, and it gives it a certain flexibility that I think contributes to its overall popularity, and not just because academics like ourselves get a nice 3-week vacation around this time.
Are you getting 3 weeks? Because I think I'm down to 17 days left. And I just started on Tuesday.
Yeah, it gets shorter every year, I think, but
I like that point that you're making about the adaptability. And I think that's something fascinating when you look at like the history of Christmas. And yeah, there's the religious angle, but that religious angle was pretty much the adaptation so that you'd be able to convert, people who traditionally have had other types of religious or spiritual or just cultural practices around this time of year, because the solstice has always been a really important time period for, humans who are afraid of the dark. So I think that Christmas kind of has at its core adaptability.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's been there. Yeah, like you said, it's been there from the beginning, because there are in almost every culture has some kind of midwinter celebration or multiple celebrations, and we're just continuing to play that out, thousands upon thousands of years later.
And even like, well, there's a couple other things, because I can think about how the research I did, because we did a couple episodes on Christmas movies for the pop culture dialogue, or sorry, for the pop culture lens. And one of the things I found fascinating was how much we can essentially trace our ideas of Christmas to Charles Dickens. And I can't remember the name of it now. Christmas. What was his book with Scrooge? My mind just completely
Christmas
blanked.
Carol.
Christmas Carol. I was going to say Christmas
yeah.
Tale, and that didn't sound right. But yeah, and it's this idea like the Victorian English approach to Christmas kind of became very popular with that story being so popular. And when it got here to the United States, then it really exploded and really meshed even further, I think, with the Germanic and Nordic approaches to Christmas to create then this amalgamation that appears to be very much focused on consumerism. So you have, of course, Saint Nicholas and the whole idea of Santa Claus coming in and becoming kind of the foundation for the idea of presents and needing to buy presents and give presents at this time. I think, to me, that's really fascinating that if you go further back in time, older popular culture essentially has had such a long lasting impact on us through the traditions that we developed from it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, that it's what we do now never really was this purely Catholic or Christian ceremony. It's those Germanic, the trees are from Germany, but the presents are English tradition, and a lot of these ideas are relatively recent as far as culture goes, and I think even sort of modern Christmas probably dates closer to the 1950s than it does to the 1850s.
With A Christmas Story coming out in the 80s, like with that time period you were talking about, seeming to have a very big impact on at least Generation X and younger folks.
Yeah, I think, and part of it's that the Generation X and younger are the ones, we talk about who really controls the media narratives, but it's the younger folks that are the ones that are buying presents, having kids, or creating or these traditions or adding to the traditions, and that's sort of creating what gets passed down, and how much of it is how it was really celebrated or how it was really imagined in the 1950s versus how we think it was and how people talk about that. It doesn't necessarily fit with the reality, but that doesn't really matter because it's about the story. It's about the feeling.
I like that too, that idea of like the objective facts or history or reality of Christmas perhaps matters less than the stories and the feelings and the traditions around Christmas, except that it does then become that fulcrum, that focus point for some cultural wars that we've been dealing with, at least in the United States, and the whole war on Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, but even the war on Christmas has been around. I mean, the modern version of that is it's a recent invention. That's a Fox News thing, but Keep the Christ in Christmas has been around since I was a kid. I remember seeing those around, and the idea that, well, we're getting too far away, and that was the 80s and 90s. We're getting too far away from these traditions, but yeah, and I'm sure there's always been those frictions. I'm sure, America being sort of this Puritan country, I'm sure that there's people, from the beginning, from the earliest days that opposed celebrating Christmas or saw the use of the trees as a pagan symbol, the Germans or the Irish or whomever. So it's always been that friction. But it's not as, I mean, it's all a thing I always get. Doesn't matter how other people celebrate Christmas. It's up to you and your family what you do. Everybody does it a little bit differently, but there are those similar elements that I think are more important than fighting about doing it wrong. But some people fight over anything.
Well, some people have, it seems that their identity only can be expressed through fighting, which, yeah. And I'm not talking professional wrestling. I like that point though about the similarities and experiencing Christmas differently, because I think this is also something I've been really interested in, and in thinking about popular culture texts and whether or not they're Christmas texts. And I think that's a really fascinating discussion and way to think about what seems to be the age-old question now, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? So my partner Chris is over here nodding vigorously, but I know, like, I've seen at least one video of Bruce Willis saying it is not a Christmas movie. So I don't have an exact answer. So I'm curious as to what you think first, Peter.
All right, so I have had this discussion. I have a podcast currently on hiatus, Meandering Through America, where we spent, I think, 2 whole episodes, like hour and a half worth of discussion talking about this very question. And my view on it is that Die Hard is on the Christmas movie spectrum. It's not as clearly a Christmas movie as, say, A Wonderful Life or White Christmas or Christmas in Connecticut. Not quite in that classic section. And I think with Die Hard in particular, it tends to be that men more often regard it as a Christmas movie than women. There's some of gender divide, and I don't have any statistics on this, but that's sort of just my feeling on it, having talked to people, having had conversations about this. But the important thing about Die Hard that makes it a Christmas movie is not just the setting, but it's about getting home for the holidays. It's about finding your family again. It's about going through a very difficult time. Most of us don't have to crawl over broken glass to get home for the holidays, but there is a lot of elements in that film that speak to the overall experience of, it's tough to get home sometimes, and sometimes it seems like there's all those setbacks and everything going wrong, and when you get home, people may not want to see you like you thought they did, or there may be these uncertainties, and it has those elements of loneliness and melancholy at times that are a lot of people's holiday experience. I'm fortunate to have had a loving family. I've had a partner for many years, so even when we're not home for Christmas, we can make do. But this is a season that there is those elements of melancholy and aloneness that I think Die Hard illustrates in a way that not a lot of other Christmas media does. I think I mentioned Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas at the top, which comes from Meet Me in St. Louis, which also has sort of that. It's not really a Christmas movie because it's sort of this year in the life of this family, but the final sequence being at Christmas, having that song, it's very sort of melancholic climax of the story that I think speaks to this is not necessarily the happiest time of the year for everybody, and maybe not even for the majority. Everyone has those, not just this year or last year, but everyone has those. You have those little moments of sadness and realization that time is fleeting.
And again, that's like one of the reasons why Christmas is at the time of year it is, at least in the northern hemisphere, is because that darkness can be really oppressive. And I spent a couple of years in Denmark, as I mentioned, doing a postdoc. And I mean, I grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm used to the cold and the snow, and it's what I prefer for Christmas. But the darkness that you get in Denmark, there were days where I think the sun would finally be up at 10 a.m. and then it would disappear again by like 2 or 3 p.m. And that amount of darkness, especially when I was living on a farm in Denmark, it is oppressive. It is amazing how, if you don't have anyone there with you, or if you don't have the ability to have a car like I didn't, you're just kind of trapped and surrounded by darkness. And that really physically can reflect, what people are feeling. So it is this amazing thing that I don't think we talk enough about in popular culture. that idea of how Christmas can be a very sad time. And I think we need to think more about that. But our another one of our guests was able to make it today. So, and he's also new to the podcast, to the dialogues. Want to make sure he gets a chance to say hello. And Brian, I'm going to ask you then the question that we were just talking about. But first, would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Brian Brutlag. I am a assistant professor of sociology at Rio Hondo College in Whittier, California. I'm also the owner and operator of the Sociologist Dojo, which is a blog and podcast that focuses on looking at popular culture from a sociological perspective. So thank you for having me. So
wonderful to have you here, because I think some of the things we were just saying, really from a sociological perspective, would be great to hear your thoughts on. But I'm going to ask you the question I just asked Peter. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Well, it depends on what criteria are you using to define a Christmas film, right? Is it the time period or is it in thematics?
So now Peter was saying there is thematics for it, and it's not just time period. Peter, would you like to tell Brian your thoughts?
Yeah, so my overriding point of why it's a Christmas movie, there is the musical elements, and it is the setting, and it is the time. But ultimately, it's very much a film about loneliness and feeling trapped, literally. There's some elements of the living home or traveling during the holidays. I hope hold pretty true to a lot of people, whether you're driving, flying, or otherwise. But it's ultimately gets that isolation of this time of year for many people. Sometimes even more in, we're at home with family, you can still feel that sense of aloneness, of being sort of stuck outside looking in. And that gets to these, this time of the year of depression and other things, and sort of the ways that doesn't, this isn't always the happiest season for everyone.
Right. I mean, the question that I always struggle with questions like this is, because I'm a sociologist and I'm looking at this from a sort of larger group perspective, is that the takeaway that most people are getting when they are watching the film? I think you're absolutely right. You can see all of those elements in Die Hard, but when the mass society, as C. Wright Mills would say, looks at the film, do they see that? I mean, obviously some people do, because you had that epiphany. But in terms of the mass society, I think they are arguing on a far more shallow and superficial level than you are.
I think one of the things Peter was saying too is that there's the struggle to get back to family and be reunited with family at the holidays. And one of the takeaways, I think, is that fighting for family matters because of the reunion between McClane and his wife at the end. But then a lot of the takeaway is also explosions pretty, and yippee-ki-yay, and this man is really tough.
Right.
Which don't really lend themselves to Christmas quite as easily.
Right. Unless you take, well, I mean, because Die Hard came first, then you get all of the other sort of weird callbacks to Die Hard in a Christmassy way, whether that be any Shane Black film that typically is set at Christmas, or if you look at like Futurama's Christmas robot that kills people, like there is this this sense of violence that we have built around the Christmas mythology, which I think is interesting, but it doesn't really I don't know if it starts with Die Hard, but because in the 80s they had like the horror films like Silent Night and a few other ones that were all like, oh, here's a person dressed up like Santa that's also a serial killer. And then you had Black Christmas, even in the 70s, you had that sort of thing. So there's been a long history of violence and Christmas like connected to it, but maybe it was the sort of John McTiernan masculine sense that that was brought to Die Hard, because I think it wasn't it a book, or it was an adaptation of a book.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a Frank Sinatra movie, and it wasn't set at Christmas originally, but same basic plot line of terrorists take over a skyscraper. But somehow it ended up as it being set during Christmas for, I'm not actually sure why.
I'm wondering though if having it set at Christmas is to maybe pull on some of those heartstrings about families being together at that time. So it's maybe utilizing these tropes or memes, whatever one will call it, about Christmas in order to make the characters more relatable or engaging, or
well, especially if you look at like 80s masculinity, in the way in which there was this sort of, and still is to some extent, emotional reserve that, masculinity teaches boys, that you can't really engage with a lot of the human emotions that are typically gendered feminine in that particular binary. And so if you construct it around an action adventure, I'm going to take out these terrorists, I can code my emotions in a very human emotions in a very masculine way, so that this coming home for Christmas and this desire to have family is the reward at the end of a successful masculine adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I would, I think part of the draw of Die Hard is that it subverts the ultra masculinity. It is a new, John McClane bleeds, he cries, he has these little emotional moments, but I agree with that point that it ultimately is in pursuit of, the return of the nuclear family. His reward is his wife gets back together with him, uses his name again. She goes from Holly Gennaro to Holly McClane. So it is subversive in small ways, but it does ultimately exist in this Reagan era action movie narrative that still defaults back to the patriarch as a family and all's right with the world.
I think it's interesting too how like they get to back together at the end of that movie, but then she's still with him in the second one, but by the third one they're broken up, and they just stay broken up at that point, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, like it all, like, I don't if you follow the entire franchise, like you're just like, what? Like that's just basically my thoughts on like anything past With a Vengeance, I think is like, I don't know if it's a cash grab, like, Bruce Willis is sleepwalking his way through it, that sort of thing. But yeah, it is this, I don't know if you can really, like, outside of the first film, understand that trajectory, because I think it gets muddled very muddled a lot, after that, because the sequel just seems to be hitting the same beats as the first one.
And I'm trying to remember, is the second one also set at Christmas? I know it's
Yeah.
Because that was also, but we don't talk about that one. That one doesn't come up as part of this question, at least from what I've heard.
Well, and there's not a lot of Christmas iconography as much in the second one as it is in the first one. Like, I can't even remember if there's like lights or trees or a lot of music.
I remember an icicle. That's
Yeah.
what I remember.
Yeah.
I just remember not liking it.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's derivative, obviously.
My partner's sitting here fuming. But so,
Good.
okay, if it's interesting because I can see it both ways. Like I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not to call it a Christmas movie. I like what Peter is saying in the sense of how it represents that struggle for the family to get back together. And, you know, that's kind of this common theme in Christmas stories, and songs or any type of text. But then it doesn't seem to have other aspects of what we would consider Christmas. So maybe that's the next thing. So when we look at Christmas, what are the criteria, as Brian was pointing out, that we would judge something as being a Christmas text? Like, again, if we go back to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and how that kind of helped to spawn a lot of the Christmas traditions from Victorian England, and it became very popular. Are there aspects of that story that then become kind of the genre tropes by which all other Christmas pop culture is measured?
Well,
I think
go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
Okay. There's something that Christmas Carol does that a lot of Christmas texts do. It's nostalgia. Even within the story, we get the ghost of Christmas past, and Christmas past was the best. It was great. Everyone was happy. How nice it was. Whatever it would have been 1820 or whatever. Young Scrooge hanging out with Fezziwig. I always think of him as Fozzie in the Muppet Christmas Carol. But there is that element, and that I think that's something that's true of a lot of Christmas media, of why things used to be so good. Let's try to recapture the great Christmases of old. Let's get back to that, maybe, or at least try to, and let's remember the way things were and how it was actually, those rose-colored glasses being what they are. The turkey tasted that much better and everything was brighter and it was nice. I think on some level, yeah, that's, that nostalgia is a key part of the Christmas narrative, of sort of getting back to that youthful exuberance and excitement and that sense of not knowing what's in those presents. It could be anything.
Now, to build off of that idea of nostalgia, that is even seen in a lot of Christmas stories and even in our own personal narratives, that we're going home. We're retreading, we're going back to the home that we possibly, not always, but we possibly grew up in. And so the draw for nostalgia, which I think is rather interesting, is that everyone says, oh, it calls back to a better time, to a simpler time, to all that sort of stuff. And in one sense, they are correct, in the sense that your life typically, when you were a child, was easier than when you're an adult, right? That there is more complexity in your life when you are an adult than when you are a child. And so when you look back on your past, you have a lot of the time these rose-colored glasses, as Peter was talking about, because you didn't have a lot of responsibilities, right? Oftentimes, especially if you grew up in white middle-class suburbia, which is where a lot of these stories tend to cultivate around, is this middle class, oftentimes in middle America, in the Midwest, and this sort of imagery that not only calls back to a sense of the country in like the 1950s and these sorts of things, which of course was a myth anyway, but it continues on in our pop culture. And we are calling back to our own childhood by default was easier than whatever we're dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's that sense of wonder that we are, because I know I feel it in myself, but it's that sense of wonder, of excitement, surprise, this belief that, you know, magic can happen is something that makes for a kid Christmas this wonderful time of year. And as you get older, it becomes harder to have that. So we like engaging with the nostalgia to think, oh yeah, I mean, when I was younger, this was the best, because like you're saying, I don't know what those presents are. I don't have to do anything but eat and sleep and play and open presents. And it's fantastic, but it's not a feeling that you can get back. And I think what's interesting is, because I'm thinking also from a fan studies perspective, that's common in fandom too. I mean, that first initial joy that you might get as a fan, you can stay a fan of something, but that initial joy is gone. It's like that initial high that you get from any type of drug. So, and I guess I'm saying now that Christmas is a drug, which is probably going to make Christians even more upset with me if they ever watch this.
Well, I mean, there's already a war of Christmas going on. It's been going on for generations. So like a new battlefront is not a problem.
All right, so we're saying nostalgia is a really important part of Christmas texts. And I think along with nostalgia, it is the focus on childhood, because I'm thinking about stories where it's not necessarily showing people going back in time or thinking about their past, but like there's Santa Claus the movie, which I grew up loving, and with Dudley Moore and whatnot. And it's not about going, well, maybe it is, but it's not really nostalgia. It is definitely focused on kids though, with kids being the protagonist, because again, you're getting that sense of wonder through the kid's eye, which maybe helps to trigger the nostalgia in the audience if they're old enough. But if it's a younger person watching this, this is just, you know, giving them a sense as to maybe what they're supposed to be thinking and feeling and doing at the Christmas time.
Well, I'd agree with that. And I think of something like Elf, which has Will Ferrell essentially playing a kid, essentially playing a stunted adolescent. And there's a lot of Christmas media like that, or Ernest Saves Christmas, that even when we have these adults in these Christmas, even if there aren't necessarily kids around, they're often stunted in some way, or you know, maybe we could even make the case for sort of the Hallmark Christmas movies that is about that settling down becomes the adulthood, that if you're not married by the time you're 30 or whatever, even if you're a high-powered Wall Street executive, there is, well, you got to get married to settle down, to grow up. But I think that's an important point. These are all sort of from these kids' perspectives in some way, even if our point of view or our protagonist isn't necessarily physically a kid. There is that embodied the spirit of childhood.
Well, and with like Ernest and Elf, you also have the kids who have to learn about the wonder of Christmas. And so that's the kind of like this conversion that happens where the stunted adult essentially helps the kids, you know, learn what this time of year is all about.
Do you also think that even if the protagonist isn't a child or coded as a child, like in Elf, or have stunted, sort of, perceptions, that there is implied some sort of arrested development, that there's a piece missing in them, that like if they spent so much time working, and regardless of all of their success, they are still missing that one particular piece. One of my favorite Christmas films, because I am a huge Nicolas Cage fan, is The Family Man, which is this sort of very Capra-esque, It's a Wonderful Life sort of, body switch where it's not a body switch, it's a timeline switch where instead of being this highfalutin executive, he now, made a different choice, and has like 3 children and is married to the woman he's always loved, and that sort of thing. And so the whole arc of that whole thing is like success, like ironically, given how commercialized Christmas is and how it's all wrapped up in capitalism, the message is no matter how much money you have, you still need this family, piece to your life to make yourself complete.
That's just Scrooge, isn't it? Because that's essentially the character of Scrooge, going back to Dickens. He had all of the wealth, but he was still missing that important piece of humanity in general, goodwill towards others. But I think, because I'm also thinking like one of my favorite Christmas movies is The Holiday, just because it's got very pretty people in it. And you've got the Cameron Diaz character, again, she seems to have it all, but she can't cry, which is the most ridiculous thing of all time. But essentially she has problems with her emotions and intimacy and things like that. So she is missing a piece, and she travels to the magical land of rural England, and she gets her piece in the form of Jude Law. So I think you're right. It's this idea that you've got these stories of people who have to learn how to be more of a whole person. And interestingly, nostalgia is a way to do it in some ways. Like, going back and thinking about the past is meant to be the way to go for the future. Is that what that means?
And it often plays out as a like a morality tale, right? It like that is the lesson that needs to be learned, right? That there was something missing. There is this sort of, again, coming out of Dickens, this sort of, there's things in your life that you are missing. There are things that you need to make yourself complete. And I haven't watched a lot of the Hallmark Christmas films or anything like that, but it seems like that's the same sort of arc for a lot of them, that they're missing something, and then through nostalgia and connecting to the past, they then achieve, or for gamers, they unlock that the new trophy or skin, or new journey,
Leveling up.
right?
No, I like the gamification of Christmas aspect to this. And I think, and I would add, It's a Wonderful Life, one of the maybe foundational Christmas texts, has this as well. I mean, the movie's about George Bailey coming to terms with, he has everything he needs. He has a community that supports him. He has these decisions that he's made are ultimately for the greater good. And we can talk about, I know some people don't like the film. There is that aspect of sort of finding completion within the Christmas season, and figuring out what really matters and what really counts. This certainly a through line through this Christmas Story. It's about getting a Red Ryder BB gun, but then that's sort of about realizing that your parents really do pay attention to you and care, and are willing to let you shoot your eye out, because that's what you want to do.
That makes me wonder, though, this idea of, missing a piece, and the Christmas stories as being a way to find the piece, especially in looking at the past. This seems very conservative, or am I misinterpreting things here?
No. It's very white. It's very upper class. It's very politically conservative. It's very straight. it is like, it's very abled as a person with a physical disability. It's like, I've never seen myself on screen, at least, especially in like romantic comedies or especially ones that are revolving around Christmas. So yeah, this is for a very, very specific market. And yet it's given wide berth, right? To that it becomes the culture, regardless of if it speaks to you or not.
Yeah, and I think that ableism is a good point. That you could be depressed in a Christmas movie, but all you need is to get that present or to meet that guy or woman, and by golly, your problems are solved immediately. You just needed that missing piece that definitely downplays the difficulties of depression, especially around this time of year.
Well, and it helps to fuel then, the hunt for the perfect gift, or the hunt for, in some way, consumerism being able to give you that feeling of joy again. It's like helps to fuel the materialism of Christmas time.
Well, and considering that most of these stories are about people who do not have to worry about money, or they don't have to worry about housing, or they don't have to really worry about any of the very real things that people have to worry about, that the only thing that they need to worry about is this longing that they have, right? Not just all, as Peter was saying, not all like their emotional stability. It's not their entire internal self. It's only a piece of that internal self of, oh, well, you're not really complete unless you find someone and love and these sorts of things. Because I don't remember any romantic comedy or Christmas romance that ends with, well, I'm just going to work on me, and I can't be with anybody right now. Thanks, though. You're great.
Yeah, I was even thinking about like Love Actually, but even Love Actually, it all pretty much ends up happily at the end. I am thinking. No, I was also thinking about The Gift of the Magi, though. That is a short story, and about how they each buy the other a present by essentially selling this valuable thing that the other one bought the present for. I'm not sure how that fits in with this idea of the missing piece, because that seems to be the true selflessness that we often hear associated with Christmas, but doesn't seem to make its way into pop culture quite as much.
Or that selflessness is like monetized in some particular way, right? Like it's I am selfish because I gave up something to give you something, right? It's that, that sort of exchange. It's still very transactional in its understanding of relationships.
Yeah, if Scrooge can afford to buy that Christmas turkey or goose. He can afford to throw money around. He's, it's not a great sacrifice for him to do any of the things. Maybe long-term things will be different, but it does create this idea of, well, being rich is great because it lets you do what you want to do, and you can make minor sacrifices to help people out. And I wouldn't say that Scrooge is doing bad, but he's essentially engaging in minor philanthropy that does reinforce the capitalism can be good, because this rich guy learned the meaning of Christmas and gave a Christmas goose and a raise to one of his employees, and why we've solved all the problems of 1850s England in just one night.
And I'm sure he'll appreciate the tax write-off too, for his philanthropy, right? Like it's that sort of thing. It's like you were saying, Peter. It's you are doing, even though you are doing something that is monumental for somebody else, for you, it is not that big of an ask. Like you are not like sacrificing as much as it, for somebody else. And that, I don't know if that cheapens like that whole thing, especially the messaging around Christmas is that it is supposed to be this selflessness, this idea of selflessness. And when you work within the boundaries of, especially in, this sense of capitalism, you work within those particular boundaries as a billionaire or millionaire, it is literally a drop in the bucket, right? Comparatively. And while that does have great rippling effects in making change sometimes, because we're in a capitalist system and money can make things happen, but you yourself are actually, in that case, buying you're absolving yourself of like guilt. And so you're buying that absolvency through a minor transaction that doesn't really have an impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of many Christmas stories where it is truly, I'm just going to give everything I have because I don't need that much. Thinking about like Aristotle's Nicomachean approach, and I just messed up my hair completely. That idea of being magnanimous and being so generous that you give up so much. I think we give up, some of our money, some of our time, and maybe that's to make someone feel better, but there's also that joy that comes from making someone feel better, which is also what we're taught through Christmas stories. So it's not truly altruistic or selfless then at that point. And then there's that guilt. If someone gets you a present, then you should have to get them a present because you can't
reciprocity,
just
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot of these contradictory emotions at this time of year, which may be why we've had, of course, all these different traditions coming in. And even more recently, like we were talking at the beginning of this about Festivus and how today is Festivus.
Mhm.
And if you had told me when I was a kid that a sitcom would produce a new religious, not even religious, but a new Christmas tradition, I would never have believed you. But there's a lot of people who really have latched on to Festivus as a way to maybe deal with some of these contradictory emotions and thoughts that have become associated with Christmas.
And it's also minimalist too, right? Like you have like an iron pole in the corner and air your grievances, which if done in a healthy way can be good. Like,
Well, and I'd say that Festivus, when I was in undergrad at least, we did a Festivus thing with my friends before everyone goes home. It wasn't always on the 23rd, just depending on when the semester ended. But it was sort of a friend's Christmas before everyone scattered off to go back home. And I wonder, whether that survives or if it mutates into now it's a family tradition. But it is, that is part of the. I mean, Festivus is sort of designed as an anti-commercialist holiday because you don't buy presents, you just do some arbitrary things, and was actually based on one of the Seinfeld writers growing up had this. His dad invented this weird tradition. So I think that there is certainly a draw to it. It is, some of it is just sort of the fun of Seinfeld. But some of it, I think, too, is that it's a way to get together with friends or have an excuse to get together and celebrate the season, even if it's just to complain about each other's moral failings.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, as maybe looking again at historical trajectory here. we've seen within the past 20, but definitely within the past decade, the idea of friend networks and friend groups starting to displace family a little bit more. So you have like Festivus, you have Friendsgiving, which is becoming more and more a common thing. And of course, from Parks and Rec, you have Galentine's Day, which is also becoming a thing. So it is kind of a way to push back, I think, against that rather traditionally conservative idea of the nuclear family and trying to understand other types of important emotions and relationships in a person's life.
Oh, absolutely. The strength, especially in areas that when you are not a part of literally the group that we've identified, recently, that is the focal point of a lot of this marketing. If you're not, again, white, upper class, right? Like all of these, and especially if you're not straight, or if you're genderqueer, or anything like that, like when you are not part of the group that is being sort of marketed to here, it is a lot easier to find comfort in other places, because you already feel that that is not for you, right? Or the depiction that it's giving you in the marketing of these stories is something that you don't relate to. It's like, I never went home and it was perfect, and my mother had cookies, well, like waiting for me, and everyone was all hugs and smiles and presents. If that isn't your narrative, you need to find and build those communities yourself, which I'm glad now that this is actually a thing. It is literally actually happening.
We got a couple of minutes before we end the live stream, so I kind of just want to end maybe on a little bit more of a positive, fun note too, because I know I need it at this time of year after the past year that we've had, and the half a year before that, and pandemic and all those fun things. So okay, let's dip into the spirit of Christmas for a little bit and talk about favorite Christmas movie, text, whatever, and why. And I think for me, growing up, my favorite was Mickey's A Christmas Carol. And I really do gravitate towards that story. But at the beginning, it was, well, that's Scrooge McDuck, and I know all these characters, and they're doing it in an interesting way. But as I got older, then it was Scrooged. And again, same story, just I loved the update that they did. And Bill Murray is one of my favorites. So that story of, a rich and powerful person learning, and not just about being a good person, but learning about the pain that they've caused and that they've felt, and becoming better through that process. I think that really speaks to me, and I really like that story.
Yeah, I like, shout out to the Muppet Christmas Carol. We've talked around it. My love of that is sort of summed up in a meme I saw recently, which was, Michael Caine's agent, and he said, oh yeah, it's just going to be a bunch of Muppets all around you playing the Dickens classic, so it's going to be fun and silly and weird. And like underneath it says, Michael Caine, I'm going to play this the straightest and most serious that I can think of. And it's like, yeah, like he is literally playing as direct, as dramatic as possible, which I think is what you need. And what actually gave rise to that other meme, where it's like, if you could take a film and keep one character and then change all the other characters into Muppets, what film would you choose? It sort of has that same flavor. But yeah, that's particularly one. And then of course I have to stump for The Family Man, which is again derivative of a Wonderful Life and Frank Capra films and stuff like that. But what I love, and I'm going to give pause here because I'm going to spoil the ending, because it's important to note that when all of this sort of goes back to the way that it was, and he is a successful businessman again, kind of like in Scrooge, where it only happened in one night, there is an implication that they get together, but it doesn't happen. They just agree to have coffee, and that's it. Like it pulls out while they're sitting having coffee. You don't know if it's going to work, but there is the possibility that it could work, which I think is a good note to end on, given that it's the hopeful sort of Christmas story, unless you look at, like, you know, demographics or data or, you know, any of that sort of stuff. So if you keep it in that particular moment and you end it right there, it's perfect.
I will say I like the melancholic Christmas films. Grew up watching It's a Wonderful Life and Meet Me St. Louis. More modern, more recent films, I think of Nightmare Before Christmas. I think of Emmett Otter's, speaking of Muppet Christmas Carol, Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas is one of the saddest Christmas films.
Yeah.
And
that's a light euphemism.
Yeah, that's you know, this is a sad time of the year, and I'm at home now. I'm glad to be surrounded by people, because that you know, COVID's everywhere. I have a few friends that parents are sick, or family members are have COVID, and there is this sense of melancholy and sadness that I think we need to talk about more. We need to be more aware of, and at the risk of opening a whole other discussion, my favorite Christmas film is Batman Returns, because it gets to that sense of loss and sadness, and it has a relationship that ends with both parties do better for themselves and spend some time apart. So yeah, this is I like Elf. Elf's a lot of fun, but Muppet Christmas Carol's fantastic. It's the best adaptation of that story. But this time of year, I always trend towards the more melancholic Christmas stories.
That is a good choice. That is a good choice.
And I think that's something to remember too, that there's no one, even, regardless of what the Fox News crew folks say, there is no one way to celebrate Christmas. Christmas has been adapted and changed throughout history in the Western Hemisphere. And as it goes beyond, it's even more so. So I think if we just remember that at its core, it's meant to be about loving one another, whoever that other is. That's the key to take away here. And if we focus on that in our happiest times and in our saddest times, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Peace on earth, goodwill towards men.
And women and everyone in between.
And all everyone on the spectrum.
Yes.
God love us, or love us everyone. Is that time, Jim?
Yeah, but according to Scrooge, you gotta be Mary Lou Retton and do backflips, and then do one of these, and then say the line.
Talk about something that was immensely ableist, where she goes from, so okay, we'll get into that. All right, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on by today, and thank you, everyone, for if you're out there watching or watching this later. I hope you have a good holiday season. Hope you have a good next year, hopefully. But more than anything, I hope you're loved, and I hope you're able to give love. And happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Festivus, Happy New Year, everything else.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. See you later, guys.